Now this story happens just after Jesus rose from the dead, and his friends were confused. They were happy, but confused. They weren't expecting Jesus to die or to rise again from the dead and be alive again. It all took a bit of getting used to. Everything was different. Everything had changed. It was exciting, but it wasn't comfy. And Peter said, "I think I'm going to go fishing." Now, I don't know if you remember, but before they were friends with Jesus, Peter and some of the other disciples were all fishermen. That was their job. So they decided to go and do a bit of fishing. The others said, "I'll come with you, Peter." So they got into the boat and off they went. Fishing can be calming and normal if you're a fisherman. So they fished all night. They threw out their nets, but they didn't catch anything. And when it came to morning, and they were a bit closer to the shore, they noticed something. There was somebody on the beach, on the shore. And they shouted out, "Have you caught any fish?" shouted a voice. "No," they shouted back rather grumpily. "Why don't you throw out your nets to the other side of the boat?" shouted the voice. And when they did, they found that their nets were full of fish. Over 100 of them. Wow! Peter remembered a time 3 years ago when something very much the same had happened in his boat. And he knew who the stranger on the beach was. And so he jumped overboard with all his clothes on and splashed his way back to the shore. And true enough, there on the shore, with a little fire, cooking some bread, was Jesus. It was just who he thought. And the others came back in the boat and brought the fish to the shore. And Jesus said, "Bring over some of those fish for breakfast." And he put them with the bread, and they had some breakfast. Put his friends out here, eating their breakfast round a campfire. Bread and fish for breakfast. Jesus wasn't busy painting sunrises or creating galaxies that day. He was simply cooking bread for breakfast. So they brought some of the fish that they'd caught, and Jesus added it to the meal. And then he broke the bread and he gave it to his friends with the fish. And they had the best picnic breakfast ever. The stranger shared his bread and was a friend. In the middle of so much extraordinariness, he did something very, very ordinary. He made bread and shared it out. Perhaps Peter and the disciples remembered the other times that Jesus had broken bread and shared it with them. I wonder if you can remember any other times when that happened. And then what happened next was that Jesus and Peter went for a little walk. Because a few days before, something had happened that Peter felt very bad about. When they had supper together, Jesus said, "Some of you will leave me. And Peter said, "Not me, I will never betray you. I will always be your friend." And then, that very night, when people asked him, "Hey Peter, aren't you friends with that Jesus?" he said no. 3 times he said, "No, I'm not friends with Jesus." And then Jesus died. And Peter was feeling terrible. So when they were on their walk down the beach, Jesus asked Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Yes, Jesus, I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." And then again, Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Yes, Jesus, I love you." And Jesus said, "Look after my sheep." And then a 3rd time, Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter said, "Jesus, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep and follow me." Interesting. 3 times Jesus asked him, just like the 3 times when Peter had said that they weren't friends. And just like that, it was all forgiven. They were friends again. Fixed. Breaking bread together is something we can all do, from the youngest person to the oldest person, from the person who doesn't know Jesus yet to the person who's already following Jesus. When we break bread together at communion, or at the meal table, or at breakfast on the beach, let's always remember that Jesus is there with us, turning strangers into friends, putting the broken back together again in new and unexpected ways. I wonder, what's your favourite thing for breakfast? Is it fish? Interesting that they had fish and bread for breakfast. In our story today, Jesus made breakfast for his friends. Breakfast on the beach. How cool is that? Let's have a think about this story with some wondering questions. Sometimes that can help us think and explore, what does it mean? What does this mean for us? So I wonder how the disciples felt now that Jesus wasn't around so much anymore. They'd spent a long time all together every day. And after Jesus died, and even now that he was alive again, he wasn't around as much. I wonder how they felt. I wonder why they decided to go fishing. I wonder how it felt when they spent all night fishing and they didn't catch any fish. I wonder how they were feeling by the morning. No fish. I wonder how they knew that the person on the beach was Jesus. I wonder how it felt when they caught all those fish and sat down and had breakfast together. I wonder what they talked about. I wonder what they'll do next. I wonder if you have any questions about this story. What's your favourite part? Maybe you can chat about it with the people you're with. Maybe you can remember it when you're having breakfast. story when Jesus was talking to Peter. Isn't it amazing that even when we mess up and get things wrong, that Jesus cares and that he listens and that he forgives us and helps us to get it right and be friends again? I wonder what's going to happen next in the story. For our prayers today, we are going to do a prayer picture. So you'll need some paper and some coloured pens or pencils or crayons, something that you can draw with. And as we go, we're going to draw some different things from the story that we heard today, and it's going to help us to think about different things to pray. So while we're drawing, we can be thinking maybe in our heads about the things we want to pray about, or we might want to say it out loud and chat to God. And we're going to start off by drawing some people. So if you remember, at the beginning of the story, we heard that some of Jesus' friends were together. So you want to draw some friends now. And it might be that you draw some of your own friends or your family. And as we draw, we're going to pray and thank God for our friends and our family and the people that are around us. Then Peter suggested, I think I'm going to go fishing. You can draw a boat. And his friends said, I think we'll come with you. And so that's what they did. They went out into the boat to do some fishing. And as we draw our boat, we're going to pray about the things that we do. Maybe when we're working, or when we're at school, or when we're playing. You might want to say what some of those things are. And we're going to thank God for all of the things that we do. Now, when they were fishing, they were out all night. Draw a moon and some stars. They were out fishing all night, which is a very long time. And when it came to morning, they still hadn't caught any fish. Maybe you can draw a fish with a big cross through it. So even though the friends had been out fishing all night, they still hadn't caught any fish. And they were feeling a bit disappointed, a bit grumpy. Sometimes things don't go to plan, and we're going to pray here about the times when things don't quite go as we'd hoped. Maybe they go a little bit wrong. God, would you be with us when things are not going to plan, when we're feeling disappointed or upset or frustrated? And then, do you remember what happened next in the story? They heard a voice calling from the beach that said, throw out your nets to the other side of the boat. See if you can draw a net. Throw out your nets to the other side of the boat. That was Jesus. Jesus was coming to help them, telling them to do something different. So as we draw our net, we're going to pray that we would be able to hear when Jesus is telling us to do something a bit different. When he's trying to help us, that we would listen for his voice. Thank you, God, that you want to help us when things don't go to plan, when they're going a bit wrong. And do you remember what happened next? When they did that, the net was filled with fish. There were so many that they nearly couldn't carry it. The net nearly broke because there were so many fish, there were so many good things. And as we draw our fish, we're going to think about some of the good things in our life. You might think of one good thing for every fish. And we're going to say, thank you, God, for all of the good things in our life. Okay. And then they got to the beach. In fact, Peter jumped straight out of the boat, didn't he? And splashed through the water all the way to the shore. And when they arrived, they saw that Jesus was by a fire. If you can build a fire, draw a fire. I'm going to use some red and some orange. He was by a fire and was cooking some breakfast. Come and join me by the fire. Bring your fish. Let's have some bread and some breakfast. And we remember that Jesus likes to spend time with us too. To eat with us, to have breakfast with us, for us to remember him as we eat bread. Thank you, God, that you like to spend time with us and chat together in just the normal things of the day. Okay, so next I'm going to draw Peter. So Peter was actually feeling a bit sad because things had gone a bit wrong. He'd made a mistake and he wasn't sure if he could still be friends with Jesus. But Jesus came and stood alongside him, and they walked together and they talked together. So we're going to pray here for anything where we think we might have gone a bit wrong or made a mistake. So thank you, God, that you come and walk beside us and that you still want to be friends. And Jesus asked some questions. He said, Peter, do you love me? And Peter said, yes, I do. He said, Peter, do you love me? Peter said, yes, I do. And then a third time, Peter said, do you love me? Yes, I do. 3 times. Thank you, God, for how much you love us and that you forgive us when we come to you and say sorry. Okay, so our last thing, we've got Peter and Jesus and some hearts for the love, is that Jesus said to Peter, feed my lambs. You can draw some sheep. And he said, take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. So every time that Peter said he loved him, he told him to feed my sheep. He had a plan still for Peter. It had not all gone wrong. And Jesus has a plan for us. He wants us to feed his sheep too, to be kind to other people. Maybe for each of these 3 sheep, you can think of something that you could do for other people. Now you might want to add some more pictures to your prayer picture, some more drawings in some of the spaces. I think mine is nearly done. So I'm just going to remember all of these things we've talked and prayed about. I'm going to offer them all up to God and say, Amen.
is your problem? What is your issue? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? What is your issue? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? Let go, let God, let go, let God, let go, let God, let go, let go, let God, let go, let God, let go, let God, let go. Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? What is your issue? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? What is your issue? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? Let go, let God, let go, let God, let go, let God, let go, let go, let God, let go, let God, let go, let God, let go. Cast all your cares upon Him. He cares for you. Cast all your cares upon Him. He cares for you. Cast all your cares upon Him. He cares for you. Cast all your cares upon Him. He cares for you. Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? What is your issue? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? What is your issue? Have you got a problem? Have you got an issue? What is your problem? Let go, let God, let go,